Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be talking about a variety of things, but we're mostly going to be focusing on how to get your tracks down and ready to be mixed. We'll talk about the reasons as we move forward, but basically you have a bunch of software instrument tracks, your CPU is peaking all over the place, and you need everything down to audio, also just for cleanliness too, and you're getting ready to mix it, whether that's in Bitwig Studio or you're sending it off to somebody working in Pro Tools. So we'll talk about some of the various ways that you can go about doing that and some things that I discovered. I finished up an EP about a month ago, and so I had to learn all of these things at the time. I really didn't fully understand it, but now I have a pretty good grasp on all of that. And just a quick self-plug, I don't have the time to promote and spam everybody with my music, so if you're nice enough and willing to, please check it out. I have some links below. I'm going to do a little bit of a fun puzzle game where I'm going to put out some stuff. This is pretty much a not entirely resampled EP, but I used a lot of samples. I tried to do some things way outside of my comfort zone. I don't work with samples on the day-to-day, so I learned a bunch of cool techniques inside of Bitwig Studio, which I'm going to try to share with some of you guys here. And if you do enjoy the music and enjoy the EP, which again will be out in probably about a week, feel free to pass it on, share it with your friends. Everything's entirely free, like always, so I do hope you are nice enough to do that. It really means the world to me. Second is if you follow the Twitter account, in a couple of months, there'll probably be a big announcement about a new project I'm working on. Similar to a lot of the videos that I've done for Bitwig Studio, it's going to be a bit broader, and it's going to try to encourage more and more people to get in there and create some things inside of the computer. Again, it's going to be totally free, so please consider checking that out as well. But let's begin with this video. And the first thing I want to bring to your attention is the preferences here. And we have these defaults here. Use raw audio if sample is shorter than 3 seconds. Use raw audio if sample is longer than, in my case, 30 seconds. I'd actually encourage you to increase this number and decrease this number because the computer is pretty good at stretching things that are about, 5 to 15 seconds in length and are things like drum loops. Otherwise, you're going to need to do it manually. And I'll talk about why that is in a second. But basically, let's bring in a cymbal crash. Okay? We've made an awesome drum loop. Everything is good to go. But we have this crash that we want to add in. So I drag and I drop this in like so. You'll notice that the length of this is 8 seconds, so that means that it's going to try to stretch it automatically. And you can see it's put into stretch mode. It's guessed that the tempo is 120.5. Well, we're working at a tempo of 110, which means that there's going to have to be some work done to try to stretch this and get it to fit. So let's take a listen and hear what's happened. And you're thinking, well, this doesn't need to be a pitch sound. As cool as an effect as that is, I just want the raw sound. So what do I have to do? Apart from going into the preferences and setting it up so that it won't auto stretch this, there's a variety of things we can do. One of them is to go here and just change this to raw audio. So we now have that like so, but let's say that we want to change the pitch on this thing. Well, that means we have to go into a stretch mode. But then the way that we can actually sync this up to play back at approximately its original speed as well as pitch is to just sync these numbers up. So change our tempo down here to 110. You'll see that we have our stretch marker at the beginning and at the end. So in theory, this should be playing back at its original tempo and pitch. And there it is. So now because we're in a stretch mode, we can change the pitch. You can even change it in real time, which is absolutely fantastic. The other mode we have is repitch. And now I'm going to talk more about repitch with our full track that we have right here. Okay, so because I've changed my preferences, this hasn't tried to auto stretch this, and I'd really recommend that you change that down to like 30 seconds or a minute, because when the computer tries to auto stretch full tracks, it has nothing to do with the software. It's just impossible. No algorithm can determine, kick drum transients to like vocal transients or other transients that may be falling off the beat. So what it's tried to do here, and I've actually already changed this, so let's go in and bring it in from scratch here. And if you've ever wondered how you can get to your desktop, you just have to go over here to the browser, into My Files, and then desktop will be right there. So let's grab this track, let's bring it in. And you can see, and actually it's funny, it changed this. Last time I brought in, it said it was like 140. This time it's guessing that it's 115. Okay, but if I'm on raw, it's obviously going to play back at its original state. I move into stretch mode, and we can throw this out of whack even more if we want. Okay, so that doesn't sound very good. We could go to 110, and now we're going to be playing back original. Or we could also go into repitch. Now, repitch is going to tax your CPU the least, and it's also going to be the smoothest sound. Now, of course, that's at the expense of it changing the pitch. So as I pull this up or something, or we can go the other direction. And you can see the way that it's changing the length of this audio file here. If we're in repitch mode and then we change our master tempo, it will change the sound, but it's not going to change the length of the audio clip as we would expect. So repitch, it's going to tax your CPU the least, and if you're not going to be messing around with any tempo changes, it's actually one of the wisest spots to be in, and I'll explain to you why that is. So I'm going to go to 110. Okay, so we're playing back again at the original. Now let's watch what happens if I'm in raw. I'm in raw mode here. I pull this back. Okay, I select consolidate. Now, in theory, when you click consolidate, and let's add another clip here. When you click consolidate, you assume that it's going to chop off the rest of that audio file, right? That's what I've always assumed. So I always wondered then, okay, let's say I take these two guys and I want to consolidate them just to make it look a little cleaner. Why is it bringing back that audio file? So I'd go back, pull this out, say, okay, consolidate, and pull it out again. What's going on? Why is it doing that? Well, what I've come to discover is that this really means raw audio file. And you really can't edit it apart from just where you're going to start and stop it. So you need to choose one of these modes. But you also want to keep things sounding identical. Now, I can't hear this, but whenever you go to one of these more complex algorithms, even if you're staying at the exact same tempo, it will perhaps color the sound a little bit. Again, I can't hear it, but other people claim to hear it, and it really bothers them. So I'll go into this and instead choose repitch. Okay, so now we're playing back exactly the same. Lovely. And now if I select consolidate, boom. Just like that, okay? And that took me forever to figure out. And this is very useful for when you're working with some full-length stuff. You'll run into this situation a lot where you need to stretch things out. You want to consolidate them, okay? And that's even true for when you're bouncing some things as well. So if I go in here and I bounce this, by default, what it's going to do is it's going to put it into stretch mode, 110, play it back at its original, but then you're thinking in your head, I don't really want it to be in stretch mode, I want it to be in raw mode. Well, in this case, because there's nothing left, it won't matter, but if I go in here, you know, I have to cut it further, and then, okay, we'll imagine that we had a bunch of different clips going on this channel, if I can get this cursor in the right place, and then we go in here and we consolidate them. Yeah. That's definitely not what we want to have happen. Okay, so now let's talk about bouncing out your final tracks. Okay, so let's just quickly run through an example. So I have a kick drum here. We'll just run it through like so. And we have a clap. All right, perfect. And then we'll have this crash cymbal hit right at the beginning. Let's make sure that that's set up properly. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that into repitch mode because maybe I want to cut off a little bit of this and I want to duplicate it. And then on this one, I want to reverse it. Okay, so right there, there's an application of that. And we'll just go ahead and duplicate these guys one more time. Okay, so let's take a listen. All right, so that's my track. It's absolutely fantastic. So in this situation, we don't have to worry about any effect tracks at all. So let's say I need to bounce this down and get it ready for somebody to either mix it in Bitwig or mix it in Pro Tools. All right, what I can do is I can go up here, File, Export Audio, and clearly I could just click each one of these tracks, hold Shift, and I could get those 3 tracks individually. If I wanted to, I could hold Command and also include the master. But what's really important here is how long we decide to set this region. Now, this is going all the way up to 9, but we don't need it to go that long. However, at the same time, I want it to go at least 1 bar over. So I want some silence just to make sure I catch everything. So let's say 6. Okay, 24-bit, that's what you're going to want. Dither, make sure that's not selected. If you're going to be dithering, based on the theory of dither, it only makes sense to do this if you're going down to 16-bit, and you only want to do it once because you don't want to add dither on top of dither on top of dither. It will actually have the inverse effect of what it's trying to do. So just go ahead and make sure that's off. I'll click OK. And there we go. It's opened all of those guys up for me here. Now I can go back inside of Bitwig Studio, go over to Browser Files again, select Current Project, and go to the Exported, and now here they are. I can click these, make sure they analyze them. Okay, sorry. Drag them and drop them in like so. All right, and we have what we wanted. Or do we? Everything looks a little bit weird here. Why does it look weird? Well, it's because it's tried to stretch all those guys. So immediately come in here, change this to raw, and now we're getting this weird loop thing to occur. So how do we turn that off? We have to go in here and turn off of loop. So you can see there's all of these levels of complexity here that aren't necessary in my opinion. But I can pull these out. And so we can see that it has put them all in here at 5 bars in length. Okay, like so. And that's what we wanted. So that was pretty easy, but this didn't involve any kind of sweeps to the reverb or to the effect track at all. So let's look at what happens if we start to add some of that in. So let's add a bit of reverb here. Let's add a bit of reverb here. We'll add a bit of reverb here, and now take a listen. Okay, so we could hear that reverb tail running all the way out beyond here. Let's increase the length of the reverb just so we can really, really hype this whole effect. Okay, cool. Now, let's say that we want to bounce the snare track. Okay, we always get that option when we right click on anything to bounce it. Well, this is somewhat problematic right now because there's only 1 track on the clip. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to select these tracks and I'm going to go ahead and click consolidate. Okay, if I had done anything to change the length of these clips, you need to be awfully careful that when you consolidate, it doesn't pull them all the way out if they're in RAW, which these ones are in RAW. Okay, but in this case, it was fine. I didn't do any trimming. It's all good. All right, well, let's say that I want to bounce these, but I also want to get the reverb sound with it. If I just bounce this right now, we can hear that the reverb is still playing through. But if I bounce it, okay, it sends it to a new track and it doesn't send any reverb to it. Right, and so that's not really something we wanted. What we could do, conversely, is we could bounce in place, obviously. And now when we bounce in place, it's not going to record those reverb tails, but what it will do is it won't mess with your send level here. So that's a pretty significant application of using bounce in place. Or the other thing you could do if you want to be super safe and not bounce in place and commit that is duplicate it, bounce this one in place, go up to this track, deactivate it, turn it to a different color, pull it to the top or bottom, get it out of the way just to make sure that everything went according to plan. That's probably the safest thing that you can do. But if we listen back now, we can hear that it saved those settings with the reverb. But the thing to be careful about is when you go to bounce this all the way out in the master, we're going to have a few problems. And this is kind of getting towards the end of the video and what the big punchline to all of this is. But if I go in now and I export, and let's actually pull this down to 5 here, I need to make sure I include the reverb, right? If I want to actually get that track. If I just bounce these down to audio, it's going to have no idea how much of a send level I've applied to the reverb. So I need to include the reverb in that. And you'll hear in a minute why that's somewhat problematic. Let me just delete all the tracks that I'm not using so I don't get confused. Okay, let's export this audio. And I'm just going to leave this at 5 for right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and bounce these down. And now we have these clips here, which once it analyzes all of them, I should be able to bring them in. Okay, perfect. But what do I have to do again? Yep, I got to go in here, turn loop off, put all of these to raw. Great. And now again, it's only going to go for 5. So let's take a listen to this and mute these guys and also just mute the reverb to be safe. So that is not what it's supposed to sound like. The reverb is supposed to trail on longer. So all this means is that when you go into export, you need to make sure that if you're doing it this way, which I don't even really recommend doing it this way, you need to set the end long enough to be sure that it catches that reverb tail. So that's very, very important. But let's talk about some of the things that I did that was a little bit different, but that I think kind of works the best. Now, if you're working and you're going to be bouncing and doing all of your mixes inside of Bitwig Studio, using effect tracks is totally fine. And I honestly believe that most electronic musicians are mixing as they go. You have to. If you aren't mixing as you go, things sound weird and you don't want to move forward. At least that's always been my experience, and that's been the experience of every person I've talked to. Maybe it's not the fully polished sound that you're going for, but you are mixing as you go. You have to make some of those small changes to make sure everything works, because if everything's sitting on top of each other, it just doesn't sound good and you're not inspired to move forward. So what I would say is if you are going to be working inside of Bitwig Studio, utilizing effect tracks is a-okay. Okay, using your reverbs and delays and sending to all of those, that's fine so long as you're planning to stick within Bitwig Studio. If you are going to be bouncing out and sending this to somebody who's working in Pro Tools, I would be very hesitant about using effect tracks while you're working, because there's nothing that people hate more than getting reverbs sent to them. Like what I just showed you. They're just going to take it off and they're just going to be applying it on their own. They're not going to use that. But maybe you absolutely loved the reverb that you had, and you also need to save CPU. So you can't just drop this reverb on all the tracks that need it. There is a workaround for that, and I'm going to show you what that is right now. And this is where the process becomes tedious. It can become laborious, but if you really care about your sound, you'll be okay with doing this. Okay, so let's go through a few different examples, and maybe I'll just do the most complex example so that we don't have to keep talking and running through all of these things again and again. And one of these examples is if you have something like a reverb sweep. Because let's say you send this off to a mix engineer and they see that you've sent them a bunch of reverb tracks, but they're like, man, screw this. I'm not going to use those. I'm going to do my own thing. They're not going to see that you've added in these various reverb swells and sweeps that might be really important to the composition. So that means that when you send them your tracks, when you send them that full mix with all of the stems, you need to make sure that you have the reverb swell included on that track. So let's say that this is just going to be our reverb swell. And I'd probably also sidechain this to the kick drum. But for right now, let's not worry about that. Although maybe some of you are interested to see how that works. So I'll do it quickly. We're just going to go from the kick, post, just bring this down. Let's just check this out real quick, make sure I can get this working properly. And I'd actually have a dummy kick, so let's duplicate this and just call this dummy. And this can actually be muted, but then I have to go in here to the reverb swell and just be sure that I choose pre-fader in this situation. So let's make sure this is working. All right, do you hear that? Do you hear how it's continuing to cut it there? All right, the release is really kind of the trick to that. All right, so that's a very classic effect you've all heard a million times, but it's going to help to illustrate this example here. Okay, so we now have to include the reverb swell, and we'll just pretend like all it's doing is swelling. Like if we had a reverb, we'd actually include it on the track itself. How do we capture that into this clip? There's really only kind of one way to do this, and I'll show you what that is. So normally when you send things to a reverb, like let's say we have both our snare and our cymbal being sent to the reverb right now, which we do. If I solo out the reverb, and then I also am just soloing out the snare, listen to what you hear. We're also hearing the reverb coming through because when we solo the reverb swell, it's including everything that's being sent to it. And that was something that really confused me for a long time. Like, why is that happening? I don't have this track playing. Well, what you have to do is you actually can turn this off of solo and mute the cymbal. Okay, but let's capture the cymbal instead, okay? Okay, there we go. So this is very particular. So you can't have this muted and soloed because of the way the signal flow is working. It's not even capturing the reverb at that point. But now we have just the sound of the cymbal and of the reverb swell. So if I set up an audio track here and I want to try and select an input, you would think, oh, well, maybe I can just grab the reverb swell because it's going from the cymbal into the reverb swell and that will give me both. That's not what you want to do. The only way you can get both is to resample from the master. And you have to be careful because the master can clip. Our regular tracks, it's impossible to clip these regular tracks. And you're thinking, what are you talking about? Of course you can clip the regular track. Well, actually you can't. And here's why. So if I'm in here and I'm playing this back, let me just be careful because I don't want to kill anybody's ears here. Okay, you can see that this is way, way too hot. And we can even peak it up more. I just got to turn on the master. But listen to that sound. It's not clipping. It's not coming. There's no distortion. We're not hearing distortion even though we should. But once we start to pull this master up, we will begin to clip there. So be careful about that, because with this technique, we're resampling from the master. So if your master is clipping, you will get that clip sound, and that is not at all what you're going for here. So let me just bring all this back to normal. I don't even know why I went off on that tangent. If you're confused about that, you can leave that in the comments and I'll explain it further. But basically what I need to do is I need to bring the input from the master, and in this situation I'll go ahead and choose master post because it's not clipping anyway. We should be good to go. All right, so I'll just go ahead and set that up to record. Auto monitor, let's turn that off, and let me just see if we got everything working according to plan. Solo. Here we go. Dummy left the kick drum in. Okay, here we go. Oh man. Okay, let's stop it. Let's solo this out and take a quick listen to it. Turn that to no input so that we actually can see the meters reading. But what you can hear is that we then capture both the swell and the audio track itself. And I know this is all a little confusing the way I'm running through it, but it's really, really significant to understand that that's how you have to resample that. And for me, if I'm sending this off to somebody working in Pro Tools, that's the way I'm going to do it. And if I am making any send tracks in general, I'm going to actually put them all onto one clip, because I don't want them trying to get the level balances correct, because I know what I want the level balances to be. Even if there's a delay that's being sent, I'm going to record them at the same time. I know you have to go through this one at a time. I know it's manual and it's tedious and it's a pain, but it's the only way, as far as I know, to really get it all onto one track. And it's important that you do that. Now, if you're mixing your own music, you can leave the effect tracks on, no problem. But here's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, and this will be the last thing I go through before jumping into my track to show you one final example. And that has to do with automation being sent to the effect track. Okay, so, and I kind of already showed you this too, but we see that we have this automation here with the Reverb Swell. Right, we have that automation happening. So if I take this guy here, and I'm going to consolidate it first and foremost, just to be safe. I just always like to do that just for even on bounces. I'm just anal about that. Now, if I decide to bounce this out, let's say I have additional audio effects on here, like I have a chorus, and we'll just play with a couple of these parameters here quickly. Let's add a chorus and a delay so that this actually has some significance. That is a really cool effect as well. I increase the feedback just so you can really hear it, throw it off a little. So that if we throw this off a little bit with the offset, it can create an even cooler effect with the sidechain. But you never thought to consider doing that. Okay, so I'm sure you all have. I don't know why I'm going that direction, but what we're going to do here is we're going to bounce this guy out. And like I've mentioned before, if I just go in here and I select bounce, it's going to cut me off here, and I don't want that. I need to make sure that it goes the entire duration, because if we're just listening to this now, a few different things. One, there's no reverb on this anymore, and so that's a problem. Two, we're cutting off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this all the way out like so. And now I'll go ahead and I'll bounce it. I could choose to bounce in place, but to be safe, I'm going to bounce, pre-fader. Okay, that should be good. Now notice when I delete this guy, something will remain. And that is our automation going to the Reverb Swell. But what also remains is the automation from the other tracks. And now this has been recorded. This has been recorded into this clip. We can hear it. But if we then go and drag this on top, that automation is going to remain. So we're going to get a doubling of that effect. And maybe you like that sound, but I actually preferred what we had before. So all this means, and this is how you're also saving tons of CPU, is after you've gone through all those effects, you can go in here and you can either group these guys together, like so, and then just go in here and deactivate this entirely. Or you can just delete them if you're really safe with what you have. And I would recommend before you go down and start to bounce everything just to audio, be sure to have a saved version of all of your software instrument tracks. I know you guys would do that anyway, but just as an added level of safety. So I can delete that. You can see that's still happening. And now it's just like what we had before. Okay, so I hope that that makes a lot of sense for you. The very last thing I'll show you is just from one of my tracks here, and this is what it looks like at the very end. So now if I was going to go in and I was going to make one final bounce, last and for all, I could go in here and go to export audio, and I would choose all of these guys, and then end is at 97, which is where I want the end to be. It gives plenty of start from the front, plenty of start at the back. You can even see I've left additional space before starting the track. But we have one other wild card factor in here, and that's that we have a pad bus, and we have a pad bus with plenty of effects going and tons of automation. Now, because this isn't running the CPU too hard, and because I mix this track myself inside of Bitwig Studio, I didn't take this off because I knew I'd be fine CPU wise, and it doesn't distract me at all. It still looks very clean. It looks like what I'd want it to look like if I'm going in for a session to work. And a lot of these have been compressed down from groups even further to try to limit the number of tracks. But if we listen to our pad sounds here, obviously this is coming through the bus, and then we get to this pad sound. That's also going to come through the bus. So the question is, how do we record the audio from the bus? Because there's no actual clip in here. We could do it by going to export audio and choosing the pad bus, but I actually prefer to do this a little bit of a different way. And it is manual effort, but it's manual effort that pays off in the long run because you know that you're getting exactly what you want. So I'll go in here, and on this track, I'm just going to go ahead and select input coming from the pad bus. And now a really cool thing that they've added in Bitwig Studio that I haven't experimented with too much is that you can actually choose where along the signal chain you want this to come out of. But when you're getting ready for a mix, you're not really going to want to deal with that. I'll just go ahead and choose post because it's coming right out of the bus here at this fader. Now, hopefully I don't do any clipping so I don't look like a hypocrite, but I think I have everything safe and good to go. So I'll turn this one on, turn auto monitor off. Again, we're coming from the pad bus here. Turn record on. Go in here. We'll start it from this point. And then obviously I'd have to let that keep on going. And it goes for quite a long time, I think. But what this has given me now is the entire track from the buses. And I could even now go in and turn off the low pad, turn off the high pad, and turn off the bus, or at least deactivate them. And then I have everything I want right here in the clip, and you can hear the combination of those two. Coming through like so. So it's really just a fantastic thing to do. Again, I know this takes a long time. And then what I would go in here and do is change this from stretch into repitch, make sure that it lines up with my tempo, go ahead and consolidate it. And now just pull this out to the entire length of the track like so that I have everything lining up and looking good. And this is what you want it to look like for somebody who's going to be working in a Pro Tool session. Notice if you hear this track, there's definitely reverb going on there, but I don't have anything in the effect track. Now, if I was to send this off to somebody who's working in something like Pro Tools, I'd very specifically tell them I only want reverb to be used as glue. I don't want reverb going to any of these tracks too hard because there's already a lot of different reverb elements going on. So the last thing I would do is go in here, I'd bounce everything out, and then I would have files that all looked like they were complete all the way across, right? We'd see lines going here, even if there's no signal coming through, and that's exactly what I would want to have. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. I know I rambled a bit and went all over the place, but I think it's pretty significant to understand some of the signal flows and ways to get your mix ready to go, or your track ready to go to be mixed. All right, thank you so much. Take care. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.